Morning, everyone. Welcome to the World Cup mood board for day 19 of this World Cup with 99.94. Well. Let us start with Pakistan cricket because it is very hard to watch, especially that innings where they batted, and not feel romantic about them as a spectacle. Very much a were you not entertained type of knock there. Pakistan were in complete trouble. They were a rabble early on. They lost Rizwan on the fourth ball. They did, and then out of nowhere, they found Muhammad Harris, who they haven't been using all tournament, who gets hit in the head and then plays, three or four of the next balls for fours and sixes and everything, suddenly striking the ball like you would not believe. Absolutely brilliant a little cameo from him. But of course, by the end of the power play, they were 42 for 3, and Bubba was gone as well. It's not been an ideal World Cup for him, has it? If you just have a look at the numbers, this is the Pakistan's top 3 in the 2 years before the World Cup, and this is them during. So if you have a look at the average here on the left, they're not making anywhere near as many runs from their top 3. And if you have a look at the strike rate, they're also not doing that slowly. So they're not getting them off to quick starts, and they're not making any runs at all. It is not really an idea. It's not really an ideal situation. But so far in this competition, they're averaging 21 with their top 3 at a strike rate of 110. Now, being that they've built all the success on that, that's what you would expect all the victory to come from. But today it didn't matter. As late as the 11th over, it was still looking pretty bad. They were scoring at just over a run a ball at that stage, and they were 71 for 4. And then it seems like someone in the in the change room flicked the Pakistan chaos switch on, or whatever Pakistan used to go from normal cricket team to ballistic. It started really with a Shamsi misfield. A ball went down to him and went for 4 that he should have stopped. That seemed to wake up Mohammad Nawaz, who next delivery picked an Ngidi slow ball. And to be fair, even the people who do pick it don't seem to hit it that often. And suddenly he hit another 4 into 100 and things were going great. In fact, he smashed a 4 and a 6 off Shamsi as well and was looking absolutely brilliant at that point until he went out in one of the most baffling ways you will ever see, which we're going to explain later. You would have thought, well, okay, that's going to derail Pakistan at that point. Instead, it seemed to up the chaos level from then on in. Iftikhar took them past 100 with a straight 6 down the ground while it started to rain. Drizzle, mizzle, whatever term that you want to use. South Africa decided to bowl Shamsi out, probably because they needed to get his overs through as quickly as possible because the ball was a little bit wet. And Pakistan took 15 off that over, including a massive hit by Shadab. The next over, Ngidi bowled out, probably a little bit too early in the innings. And Iftikhar hit him for 106-meter 6. It was ridiculous hit. The longest of the tournament so far. So Pakistan took another 15 runs. And then Anrek Nortje, who's been pretty damn good in this tournament as well, he got absolutely chewed up by the Pakistan chaos machine. 13 runs from the over, another Shadab 6. Parnell went for 11, and then Nortje was bowling again. And the 19th over, obviously, at this stage, it was almost peak Pakistan madness. Iftikhar brought up his 50, celebrated wildly. 2 balls later, Shadab smashed a 6 over square leg, and it was a waist high, no ball as well. The free hit also went for 6. The next ball was launched into the air, and as it went up, you could actually, the higher they were hitting the ball, the more you could see how wet it actually was. And then it went straight to Markram, who dropped it, and Nortje's over had gone for 18 runs, and there were still 2 balls left. And both of those balls were wickets, because how else do you want to explain what happened next? Shadab and Mohammad Wazim went out first ball. Bless him. And then with an over to go, Iftikhar went out for 51 to a good catch by Russo, especially considering that at this stage it looked almost impossible to be able to catch that wet ball. Nassim Shah was dropped by Parnell. Harris Raf should have been run out off the last ball. There was basically run out opportunities, drop catches, everything was going on at the end. But from all that, from collapsing at the start, from the weird Mohammad Wasim thing, from Mohammad Nawaz literally retiring himself out, whether he knew it or not. Oh, there was also a dead ball that was given, but then was taken away, and so they played it out, which I don't really. Oh, was that in that innings or the next innings? I'm not confused. But there was so much weird things going on all the way through. No, that was in that innings. Yeah, that was in that innings. It was in the 19th over. It was so lost by the drop catches and the runouts and the wickets and everything else. But here's the thing that's crazy about all that. Pakistan had a terrible start. Their top order is usually their strength, and they made 185 for 9. Yes, it was rain assisted, but still, it was a high score in Australia by nearly 30 runs. And also, it was their 30th best T20 total of all time after being in trouble when they were 3 wickets down, in trouble when they were 4 wickets down, in trouble when they were in 5 wickets down. Absolutely ballistic they went at the end. And it was awesome to watch, and that was where they won the game. From the moment South Africa went out there, they never looked like they were a realistic chance of chasing that down. So let's go on to Iftikhar and Shadab for a moment. So I mentioned this briefly in an earlier episode about Iftikhar. I was working for an agent for a while and basically helping him set up narratives and stats and all those sorts of things to help sell his clients to different kinds of teams around the world. And Iftikhar was on his books. And one of the first things I would do is I would go through, especially with the players who weren't already stars, and trying to work out if this was someone that was worth spending a lot of time on or not. And you looked at Iftikhar and you're like, there's actually clearly something here. His numbers aren't great, but there are little flashes of it. And you could see that there was a fantastic talent beneath that. But there was one thing that I couldn't work out, because he'd been really, really successful in Australia against a very, in conditions you wouldn't automatically expect him to be. And I couldn't work out if I was what's the best way of putting it? Overestimating him based on that. I hadn't really thought about that much between then and now, if we're being honest. He's back in the Pakistan team, I would say, partly because they are playing in Australia, but also because in 2021, you'll see top right-hand corner here, he went absolutely ballistic, averaging almost 50, striking at almost 150. He hasn't been as good. His actual year is back here in the middle again this year, but he got himself back in that team. But there is also the Australian thing that is worth mentioning. If you look at him and I should point out that all that work I did for the agent didn't do him any good, because I don't think he's ever played in a major league outside of the PSL. In the PSL, he averages 19 and strikes at 118. Those are not good numbers. But because he can bowl too, obviously he does give that extra ability to teams, and so he's been kept around. But he was spectacular last year, and he came back. But just to go back to my point about what he's been like, I was looking at it from, I think, originally about 6 or 7 innings when he'd originally, or maybe even less than that, but a couple of innings where he played in Australia. If you look at him in his whole career, he's played 169 T20s in Asia, 2 in Europe, and now 13 in Oceania, so across Australia and New Zealand. We'll throw out the Europe ones. If you look at his Asia numbers, he's a handy bat, but he doesn't particularly strike the ball at any huge rate. You then go across to his Australia and New Zealand numbers. Now, this is from 13 games, as I said. This is in Australia. He's been better than he has in New Zealand, but he's also been really, really good in New Zealand. But in Australia, he's played 7 innings there, and he's made 350s in those 7 innings. And he's been striking at 140 in those knocks as well. And this is against, you can count the New Zealand stuff as well. The stuff on the right is against international teams in foreign locations. The stuff on the left has some PSL in it, has some cricket for Pakistan in it, but it also has a lot of low-level domestic tournaments as well. It seems to me, and I've been thinking about this, I was thinking about this when he made the runs in the first time. but even more so watching him again today, that little bit of extra pace and bounce, certainly he just seems to prefer the way the ball's coming on. And not, it could just be a fluke of his record, but watching him, it doesn't look like a fluke of his record. It really does look like there is something specific but with the way that he bats, where he does prefer the ball coming on a little bit. And I did have a look. He does prefer pace, and obviously you're going to get more pace in those areas as well. So there's no doubt that is a part of it. But this does feel like there is something to this. And I don't know if that means he has to, retire from Pakistan and go, take up a professional contract in New Zealand or Australia. But it is interesting. Today, he hit 51 from 35. He was kind of almost the calmness within the chaos of the Pakistan team today. It was really Shadab Khan who changed the match, although Iftikhar backed him up very well. Shadab picked up 52 from 22 balls, taking essentially what was a toilet bowl 95 for 5 after 13 and making it into 185. It was for Shadab. It was also his. It was Pakistan's second fastest T20. Plus, he took crucial wickets, one of which we'll talk about later. But he took a couple of wickets in a row just before the rain that were quite important. 2 games in a row, he's been exceptional for Pakistan. I noticed they put him down the order. I still think he should be batting a little bit higher up. But he ended up with 2 for 16 today. And that DLS, taking the wickets when he did, really helped from a DLS standpoint as well. So I thought he was incredible. Let's move on to Mohammad Nawaz, because we mentioned it very briefly before. I don't think there's a way I can really tell the Mohammad Nawaz story without making it into a video, because I do think at this point that Mohammad Nawaz might have the most haunted World Cup campaign in my memory. And this is recency bias because I just saw it happen again today. But I don't think I've seen so much weird, public, big, bad luck happen to one player in one World Cup. There's failure. People fail all the time. And you might be a really good bowler and have some catches dropped. He seems to have had worse than that. Muku, roll the tape. All starts with game 1, India versus Pakistan. You may have heard of this game. At first, he gets smacked around everywhere, and so his captain tries to hide him. But then that doesn't work, as at the end, he needs to defend 16 runs from the final over. The plan is for him to bowl medium pace, which the last time he did in a serious way, he was 14 years old. So he bowls full tosses and wides, and he ends up losing the game from the final ball. Then he plays Zimbabwe, where he's not even expecting to bat. Pakistan collapse. He gets stuck at the wrong end for a while because of Mohammad Wasim swinging, but he finally gets the game to 3 runs needed from 3 balls, only to play it miss at 1 and be dismissed from the other one. Then he has to watch Shaheen Afridi get run out going for the tie. And then today, this was something very special. Tabraiz Shamsi hits him on the pad and he is given out LBW. But he also runs. No one knows why, because it's not his call. But while he's running, he also stares at the umpire. Because of all this, he is run out. So he leaves the field, probably thinking that the run out stands. But it doesn't, because the ball was dead once he was struck on the pad and the umpire thought he was out LBW. So he couldn't be run out because he was LBW and the ball was completely dead. Now, had he stood around and asked any questions at all, he would have found this out. Instead, he left the field without reviewing his LBW because he thought he was run out. Had he stayed, he would have been given not out because he hit the absolute arse off the ball. Dude, your World Cup is cursed. It's almost haunting looking at those 4 images as well. What a ridiculous World Cup he has played so far. Anyway, on to South Africa, who I suppose have had a more normal World Cup, but maybe not. South African rain again. Hey, given the long history with it at the World Cups, which we talked about earlier, I'm not sure this one even cracks the top 5. Although, this one, I remember talking to Neil Manthorpe from South Africa 99.94 podcast about it, and he was saying that he gave me the ones that he thought were fate-altering. This one is probably not going to be fate-altering unless something tragic happens in the last game against the Netherlands. But again, there's absolutely no doubt that the rain affected this game. South African bowlers have been their strength in this tournament, and Bangladesh were bowled out for 101. India didn't make much more than that. And if Sky hadn't have made any runs, even less so again. And things were going to plan against South Africa today. They got the early wickets. They were chipping away in the middle overs as well. and then it started to rain. Now, I think at this stage, Pakistan had already slightly started to launch a fight back, but the first drops of rain were around that period anyway. And Shadab obviously saw this as an advantage, especially when it came to the spinner, and he went even harder than I think he might have normally. And the effect of the rain was easy to see. I mean, the bowlers couldn't grit the ball at times. In fact, neither could the fielders. Norkia, who is an incredibly accurate bowler, bowling, a bunch of full tosses in a row, was really, really clear. And if you look at the bowling economy in the tournament so far, so Norkia is just going just about above a run a ball, and he's up around 10s and over in this particular game. And South Africa again, just their econ just went absolutely through the roof. In this game compared to how they have been bowling. So there's no doubt that it played a big part. I actually think that it was dangerous for Norkia to be bowling. When we talk about danger in wet conditions, we talk about bowlers slipping over, fielders and batters slipping over. Once that ball gets that wet, really don't know how you control it. How you control it at his pace. And also, he can't just run in and bowl seam up, right? He's got to still try things. He's got to roll his fingers on the ball. He's got to try different lengths. And it felt like any slow ball was a chance of being a full toss, and any Yorker was a chance of being a full toss. If one of those Yorkers get away from him, it could be really, really bad for the batters. So, one thing I would say is that the South Africans do, and I think Temba Bavuma might have said this, South Africans do actually practice with wet balls, and most cricket teams do now. And the thing is that really, really does help, and it makes you feel a little bit more comfortable. The thing is that it doesn't stop the ball being slippery. It makes you feel like you can go through the motions and not bowl as many poor balls. It doesn't actually stopping all the balls going out there. And I think the other problem for South Africa today is that that rain or that mizzle or that drizzle, whatever it was, they didn't come off because it wasn't that heavy. So the ball just stayed wet, and there was no way to have a break and come back, which is usually what happens. And we've also seen that it's the second time in this tournament that it's happened to them. Against Zimbabwe, they were bowling really well early on. It looked like Zimbabwe was going to get bowled out for about 30. And then when the rain came in, they really struggled again. I'm not saying that their bowlers aren't good at it. It could just be that the conditions were so bad in both of those. And then, of course, it also affected their fielding. The rain really started to fall, to fall in the 19th over, and the umpires clearly had a discussion about coming off, but it was around the point where it looked like they couldn't stop it. Pakistan had done most of the damage by then anyway. But in the final 2 overs, South Africa dropped 3 catches, at that stage, it was quite clear. I was watching it, and I was thinking to myself, this isn't a real World Cup. Right? Like, it's the second time I've watched a South African game this World Cup going, this should not be happening at a World Cup, this particular game. It honestly looks like one of those game shows where the amateurs are asked to do something because they will fall over or because it would go horribly wrong. Every time the ball went up in the air, and Riley Rousseau took a great catch in the middle of all this, but every time the ball went up in the air, I kind of expected them to drop it and then like a bucket of slime to come down on their head. Anyway, another great day of South Africa and rain in the World Cup. All right, we'll move on to their batting. So Temba Bavuma batted extraordinarily well tonight. His third ball was smashed. Pull shot from Sheen Afridi. Haris Rauf, who he really went after, went short at him again in the next over, and he played it. Help on your way pull shot. Then he dropped one wide to Bavuma, who got under it, smacked a cut shot away. A lot of really good shots. And then a few overs later, he played probably his best shot, and maybe, certainly the best shot in South Africa's innings, when he went across the crease a little bit and he ramped one over his shoulder for 6. He just played beautiful cricket. And then the spinners came on, and Bavuma is one of the few players in T20 cricket who's much better against spin than he is against pace. It's very rare to have a player better against spin than pace when it comes to average and strike rate, but certainly strike rate. And he is one of those. So, of course, today he goes out. First ball to Shadab Khan. His wicket, sets up Pakistan when Markram goes out a couple of balls later as well. They're well behind Duckworth-Lewis at that stage. And from the moment Bavuma went out, they didn't look like they had much chance. And they didn't look like they had a lot of chance before. But if you do look at the scorecard, Bavuma, for all the talk about, how he shouldn't be in this team and everything else, he made 36 off 19. Was top scorer by some distance. And really, weirdly enough, the only player who looked like hitting regular boundaries. But the whole innings was pretty disappointing by South Africa from beginning to end. The rain probably didn't really help them much when they were bowling. And no doubt Pakistan got 20 to 25 runs more than South Africa would have been ever thinking possible for big periods there. But they kind of batted like that too. They batted like they had the worst of the luck. Also, they didn't have David Miller in this game. So he hopefully will be back for the next game or the finals if they make it there. But yeah, I thought it was pretty disappointing, their batting display. Whereas the bowling display, I thought they bowled pretty well. And then when the ball got a little bit slippery, they really struggled with that. All right, on to fake fielding. You may have seen the fake fielding story on social media, on your social medias. So let's play the video that I've made about it and have a look at the entire thing. Fake fielding. It's when a fielder tries to distract or deceive or obstruct a batter willfully. And you can have a look as this throw comes in. That is exactly what Virat Kohli tries to do here. He fully commits to a mock throw. Now, whether he did it to actually get a run out is pretty doubtful. The law is very clear. Was he trying to deceive the batters willfully? And the answer is yes. So why wasn't a 5-run penalty given? Well, this one is going to blow your mind. The umpire didn't see it. And you can see that the umpire is looking vaguely in the right area, but we're also too far away to see where his eyes really are. He should have seen it, and if he did, I would have expected it to be given as a 5-run penalty. But many people watched this match and didn't see it, even though it happened even on TV right in the middle of the frame. I didn't put anything in the show about this yesterday because I didn't notice it, and I watched this ball. Yeah, it's I would love to have done it yesterday, although it gave me more time to actually go through the whole thing and find all the stuff I needed for it as well. But the truth is that cricket games are watched much closer now than they've ever been watched before. And we are now starting to Zabruda film these games, especially the major games, especially major games in World Cup. And then what happens is people go through this footage and they see something that an umpire has missed or commentators have missed or whatever it may be, or both. And they claim that, that a huge injustice was done, right? I get it. If I was a Bangladesh fan, I would be annoyed. But if you watch T20 games really closely, you will see that this sort of stuff happens all the time, right? If you go to a T20 game and you're not watching it on TV, do me a favor, watch 2 or 3 T20 games and count down how many times you see a fielder outside the ring when the ball has been delivered. It happens a lot. Sometimes they just don't get in time. Sometimes they back away, especially if someone's scooping a lot, or sweeping a lot, you see fielders just back away. And when the ball's delivered, quite often that happens. Then you've got, you can see this in test matches a lot, maybe T20s, although I don't know if it's as common. It's just how many times the wicketkeeper off a spinner has their gloves in front of the stumps when they take the ball. It probably happens 1 in 100 deliveries of spin bowling. And yet it is called about 1 in 10,000 times. And if you have a look at that other game we saw in this World Cup with, who was it, Zimbabwe and Bangladesh, it was by accident that it was seen in that particular case. You want to go a step further? Back foot no balls. I see back foot no balls quite regularly in cricket. Again, they're not called. Now, part of the reason is we have 2 umpires on the field and then some help from off the field, right? When you actually have the ability to be watching it, and there's, thousands of you watching it, hundreds of thousands, millions, maybe even hundreds of millions for these games, we see a lot more, right? And so I cannot stress this enough. There are mistakes like this made in cricket for every single game that you have ever watched. You just haven't seen them. And before social media was around and people were dissecting them the way that we are now, the Patterson Gimlet style, these things just weren't spotted as much. To point that out even more, I'm going to show you something that actually happened in this game today. In fact, I'm going to show you two things that happened in this game today, because there were two moments of umpiring mistakes that happened in Pakistan's game today that probably haven't got much attention, but certainly happened. All right, so we're going to play the video now. Muku, please. Starting to call a dead ball and then stopping. This was a mistake. It should not have counted as a live ball. It was even noticed by someone live on Twitter, and 20 minutes after they sent it to their 3,000 followers, it still had basically no interest. Oh, and I can go further. What about this? Mohammad Wasim is coming into his bowl, and his towel basically does the Watusi on his feet. Bavuma doesn't see it, and neither does the umpire, and this towel was hopping. I cannot stress how many times a game stuff like this happens. The difference is that in a big World Cup game, more people take notice, and these stories start to become conspiracies. So yeah, so I hope that explains it to everyone. So that was two. The first one is absolutely baffling. That you can see just in the footage there, just in front of us. The umpire is calling a dead ball. It should be a dead ball. I don't know why he stopped and decided it wasn't. My guess is it's because he was calling it because the spider cam came into a ridiculous position there. It could have been something else. I'm not 100% sure. But either way, Rabada didn't see the arms out in time, so he goes through to bowl. And obviously wasn't a problem for the batter either, who just went through with his shot naturally. So these things just happen again and again and again. And I think we need to understand this sort of thing, because that's the world we're in. It's a bit like there was a point when a lot of people in England didn't like DRS. And one of the things they'd say is, oh, we just got to scrap DRS, right? Let's scrap DRS. It doesn't help the game, and then we'll be fine. The reason that you can't scrap DRS is the TV companies are still going to show all these mistakes. People like me, people like Jeet here, people on Twitter and social media are still going to notice them. And what you're going to have more mistakes going through every game. All DRS really tries to do is try and make sure we get a little bit closer to the umpiring, and the umpiring being correct, I should say. And then on top of that, it doesn't look silly. And what used to happen before DRS is literally someone would smash the ball onto their pad, be given out LBW, and then the TV cameras would show it for the next 2 hours, right? We're trying to get a little bit away from that. And we can't get everything. We can't have cameras in every single part. There aren't enough ways of covering the game correctly. So we're going to have a short break here. And after the break, I will chat to you about your questions from today and anything else you can throw in. And then if you have more questions after that, you can follow me over to my Spotify Live that I'll be doing afterwards.
You're listening to Cricket's Conversation on 99.94. Whatever your team, we have the show for you on podcast, YouTube, or on the 99.94 app. We have India, England, South Africa, West Indies, and now Sri Lanka covered. If you want to find us, the best way is to follow us on social media at 9994DM by downloading the 9994 app or Google 99.94 on podcast. We speak cricket.
All right. Okay, let's get on to your questions. Wrong one. Sorosh says, why don't stadiums around the world follow the Sri Lankan way of covering the whole field during rain? I can't imagine it being a financial decision. It is definitely a financial decision. I can promise you that. You need a lot more staff to begin with, but there are countries that could do it financially as well. It's the question we kind of all ask. Every time we're in Sri Lanka and we see it, those of us who are not from Sri Lanka, we just go, kind of makes sense. Boards tell us it costs too much money. I don't know. Would it not save them money in the long run? I honestly, I couldn't tell you. But at this stage, it does seem a little bit ridiculous that we have a way of covering the entire ground and we choose not to. I think there must be a better way also of covering more of the ground. Even the Sri Lankan method is not particularly the smoothest method. It just needs a lot of staff to be able to do it. But I think there should be another method, and it's a bit disappointing that cricket hasn't come up with that, but also not surprising. These sorts of things come from the fact that cricket is not run like a league, right? If this was a football league or a basketball league or a baseball league or a rugby competition, everyone would get together and be like, let's try and sort this out. But because it's not like that, there isn't really anyone in charge. The ICC is not in charge of those sorts of things. Cricket boards don't like to give up that sort of stuff to the ICC either. So we end up with this over and over again. But you would think, even if, as I said, the ICC is in charge of this particular game, they could make it a rule. Rain has played a bigger role, so we're thinking about rain more, but they could have made it a condition of Australia or any team hosting a World Cup that they try and cover as much as the ground as possible. They haven't, and here we are again. SRV says, what are the chances for Pakistan to get qualified now? I don't know what the chances are, but essentially, South Africa need to lose. That's the most important thing for Pakistan from here on in. I suppose I'm trying to think what the points tables are. There might be some wet weather conditions as well that might help things. But yes, as much as anything, the weather is the most important. The result is the most important thing. Nikon says, do England and India have an advantage because of playing later than other teams in their group because they know what to do? I'm trying to have a look. Is the last game... what is the just struggling to see my board. My kids, I think, have rubbed it out. Whoever plays the last games has an advantage. That's going to be the same for anyone in that group. So if India, you say that, it's funny the way you frame it, because you say England and India have an advantage. To Bangladesh and Sri Lanka also have that advantage. So any teams playing in that last game, we should be playing it the way that football is played, where all the games in the last round should be played at the same time. But cricket has never had a contract like that and doesn't feel comfortable with it. It's the same as... There's a few things that are just openly corrupt about cricket. That's why I laugh when people go on and on about, another close one has gone for India and, all these sorts of things. It's like, there's open corruption in cricket. In normal sports... the most important thing is to have a very, very, to have a random system to pick who plays who. We literally make India and Pakistan play each other all the time. Right? We literally do it. And on top of that, we know that the absolute best way of the final rounds is to play all the games at the same time. And we don't do it because they want to make a little bit more money from the individual rights of the games. It's nonsense. Anyway. But yeah, let's worry more that a no ball that was probably a no ball was called, while a dead ball happens on the field and no one even notices and cares. Sorry, just if you're going to be angry at everything. Don't just be angry when you think it affects the team that you like or hate. They said this is not the channel for this sort of stuff. This is the channel for proper cricket fans, right? It's not the channel for the nonsense that you get in other places. Kanyasani says, what should Rabada do to improve as a T20 bowler? I think it'd be really interesting if you worked with an analyst and found someone who could have a look at other bowlers who have a similar kind of release and similar kind of bounce and similar kind of movement to him and see what they have done. I'm not sure if there is someone that is that similar, but if you basically... what I try and do when I'm working with players like that, and I've never had the ability to do it with the Hawkeye data, which Rabada would, but I would want to look for a nearest neighbor and 3 or 4 bowlers who are quite similar, that when the ball comes out, maybe it skids in the same way, maybe it takes off in the same way, maybe they release it from a similar height, whatever that may be. And then have a look at how they've had success. And if there's no one like that, it's almost then going through and saying, well, what bowler do you want to copy in order to be able to do this? But I do find it very interesting that Rabada and Cummins seem to be the 2 guys who haven't worked out a method. Have a look. There are some really, really interesting players out there like Peter Siddle, Josh Hazlewood. So there's 2 Australians off the top of my head. Southey. These sorts of guys have kind of worked out little methods and little systems that work for them. Arshdeep, right? Sam Curran, we talked about yesterday. So there's a few players out there that have worked out, these little holes that they can fill in. These aren't as talented as bowlers, well, Hazlewood aside, but they aren't as talented as bowlers as Cummins and Rabada. Cummins and Rabada don't seem to know what the main delivery should be. There's a really interesting video that I think it was Pat Cummins and Adam Gilchrist watched the World Cup footage together of the last World Cup, the World Cup's final footage together. And one thing that Cummins says at one stage is that 9 times out of 10, the best ball is the top of off stump ball. And we've all watched him bowl and get smashed. And Rabada, I think, bowls a very similar length and line that he probably does in Test cricket as well. And it's not working. We saw Mohammad Shami's another one it didn't work with for a long time. It's probably hard for some of those guys who are so good to actually go away from what made them successful. It's easy for Harry Gurney or, Rahul Bhatia or, Benny Howell, right, to change their bowling and just go, oh, okay, that's not working. Let's go with this. It's much harder than when you're a really high-end bowler. So I don't have a very good answer. But I think it'd be a fascinating study to go through all of his Hawkeye data, to go through literally every boundary he's ever been hit for in T20 cricket, and then also have a look at all the successful balls, all the dot balls, all the wicket-taking balls, all those sorts of things, and almost filter them into 3 different areas, and then go through that. I think it'd be fascinating. I don't know if, I mean, he would almost have to initiate that himself, because he's still a highly rated player. He still has success in T20 cricket. He still takes a lot of wickets at the death. He's been a leading wicket taker in the IPL a couple of times. But when you do break down, he's nowhere near as efficient or as effective as many other bowlers, and they're not as good as him. So you do have to. I think it is worth doing a proper, almost like you strip him back. And we saw Hardik Pandya strip his game apart when he had an injury. So players do it when they have injuries. They quite often don't do it otherwise unless something goes wrong, or they're trying to change and evolve. It's a really good question, though. I'm not sure I have the exact answer, but I do think there is a process of which he can become a better bowler that won't cost him a fortune, and he could do it with some people that he trusts, and to be able to peel back the layers. It's one thing I've noticed in cricket. So as an analyst, I remember when I worked with St. Lucia the first time, I was working with St. Lucia, and then like an hour before bed every night, I was watching, I forget what the show's called, but there used to be a documentary that Netflix had, which was on a junior college football teams. And you're watching amateur athletes who aren't even at the top level of amateur football coming off the field and watching all this footage and having it broken down for them with coaches and all this sort of stuff. Most cricket coaches don't watch the footage from the previous game. Most players don't watch the footage from the previous game. It's certainly not done together in a proper environment. It's not done constructively. Those are the sorts of things that I think that's just an obvious one. The 2 obvious ones in cricket are opposition scouting, especially at the ground scouting, not just having a look at the footage on the camera. Opposition scouting and using the previous game's footage to help build your players into better players. All right. Nikon says, should Brevis have been in this team instead of Klaasen? Ooh, not sure Klaasen has been great in the last couple of months. Yeah, I'm never the world's biggest fan of Klaasen. Although he's a good player, and he's a very solid player, and he's a very good squad member because of what he brings. But I've never looked at him and thought he's an automatic one. Brevis, they just seem to be bringing Brevis on a little bit slow. It's hard to say that he played that innings, and so therefore he should be in. Just because it's so different to what he would have been doing in this World Cup. Generally, World Cups are won by more experienced squads because they've seen more things. So when things go wrong, as they almost inevitably do in World Cups, you have the ability for the older players who are seasoned professionals not to get too high, not to get too low, work out. I think being a senior professional player really means that you are a very good problem solver at a certain point. You are used to those things, unless you're one of those athletes who's just a freakish skilled person or a freakish athlete. But for more or not for professionals. So I can see why teams don't go with younger players. Brevis just seems like such an otherworldly prospect that it would be an odd thing if he would not have had an impact. I know that Stubbs is the other one that people have talked about. I like Stubbs. Klaasen, as I said, is quite handy in many different ways, but Brevis just looks like he is going to be the next big thing. If they win this World Cup anyway, it may not matter. And perhaps, I think thinking back on it, when Rassie was injured, I wonder if there was an opportunity around that point to make the change. But they hadn't brought him into the setup beforehand. It's a huge thing to bring someone in completely from outside and just drop them in a World Cup in that environment. But maybe he's so talented that doesn't matter. But I always say, if you go back to young AB de Villiers, it took a long time for him to come good. And I know that they're not the same person, and Brevis may be completely different. He may even be better than AB de Villiers, or he may never even get anywhere close to that level. It's, I was thinking back to Inzamam Al-Haq in the 92 World Cup. I don't know what his age was in that, but, dropping players into those situations quite often doesn't go as well as you would think. Quite often, I spend a lot of time watching old cricket footage, and you see teams sometimes and you go, that team was good, they should have been much better. But then you realize that the players that they had when they were playing at that World Cup or in that test match or whatever it was, weren't that player that you're thinking of in your head. They're the player before that. And it's a tricky one, is the best way of answering it. But it's a good question. Mohammed says, Mohammed Harris, does his selection in the team have any statistical backing? I did go through it, actually. When he started making runs, I was like, I remember hearing about him a little bit. I don't think I've seen any clips of him. But I remember someone telling me to keep an eye out on him, must have been earlier this year. And so he was in the back of my mind, but I hadn't really paid any attention. But I did have a look at him today when he started to make the runs. In 2020 and 2021, he basically didn't hit the ball off the square. And then this year, he's gone from strike rates of around 100, 110 to 150. My guess is that is just a player who has matured physically. Generally with batters, there's a couple of guys in the West Indies that I've seen, in similar sorts of ways. Maybe Puram was probably one, but there was a couple of other younger players as well, where you looked at them and you're just like, this is an international quality player. However, at the moment, if you bowl short to them and you put fielders out for the short ball, unless they're hitting, unless they're using the pace to go over the top, they're eventually just going to hold out, and they can't flat bat balls back down the ground. They can't muscle balls away, all those sorts of things. And if you've ever played with a really good junior player in club cricket, you know probably exactly what I'm talking about. You can tell that they're the best player on the field, but they just, they play a glorious cover drive, and cover just picks it up and throws it to mid-off, right? I'm not saying that was completely the case with Muhammad Wasim. I need to do bigger, but his numbers really profile like that of a player who's just physically got a little bit stronger. And, also confidence, being in the top level of professional cricket. But the jump up, I think his original bad numbers were even before the PSL. So he's clearly changed either technically or physically, and I would assume it's probably both, but maybe the physical one has had the bigger part of it. Adil says, mathematically speaking, Pakistan is an above average team with a standard deviation of infinity. Yeah, I mean, this World Cup is, you're going to look at this and think back to, they lost 2 games that came down to the last ball. They beat South Africa with a little bit of assistance, but they still beat them. And obviously the game against the Netherlands wasn't particularly close. I said earlier on in the tournament, and I was completely stand by this, if this was a 15-game tournament, I still would expect them to be, up as one of the better teams by the end. They played 4 games and they're already, beating a team that a lot of us rated really highly. So they're a fantastic team. That innings was absolutely, from what Mohammad Nawaz did is so random. Then you've got the dead ball situation. Then you've got the early wickets. It really was just such a bizarre innings, even by Pakistani standards. LPN says, I think he's asking this to someone else. Do we really think that South Africa will lose to the Netherlands? So I find it very hard to think that against that bowling attack, unless they get another wet ball, that Netherlands can score over, unless it's a great batting pitch. But let's say par is 160, right? I find it hard to see how, in that situation, Netherlands are going to score over 130. right? So if par was 200, you'd be talking about them maybe not scoring over 160. Because they have good bowlers, and because Van Meekeren specifically is bowling so well, if they score, I don't know, 130, 135, 140, and Van Meekeren does something, I still think that South Africa have a weakness in that sort of middle to late part of their order. And it's on purpose. They know they have that weakness, especially without Pretorius there. So I think from that perspective, I think that's where they're aiming in that way. But it's very unlikely, as you said. All right, who else we got? Anant says, do you think Sikandar Raza will get an IPL contract? As far as what team will bid for him, I'd have to go back through all the teams, and I'll do a big deep dive on the IPL. I've got so many notes that I didn't get to cover at the end of the IPL season, and I've recorded all the games, so I want to do a rewatch and go back through and have another look and see what we find. But I would say that he's a 30% chance of getting an IPL contract. He's old, and so you don't want necessarily, we're still early on in the cycle of the mega auction cycle. So you probably would prefer to have a player who's not 36. He still is an off spinner, even if he's clearly not really an off spinner anymore. And also, I don't think I think he probably needed a couple more big innings against better teams to completely cement it a spot. I think if he'd done that, could have been very different. But the fact that he hasn't managed to do that, I think might hold him back a little bit. But I still think a lot of teams are going to be looking at him. QCW says, India get lucky again. Umpires didn't see. Of course they didn't. I mean, I've just shown you other things that the umpires haven't seen. It happens all the time. I don't understand how someone can come to my channel and like cricket enough to care about what I'm saying about it and to spend all this time having a look at it and not have seen these sorts of things over and over and over again. Do you realize the amount of mistakes that happen in a cricket game that umpires don't pick up on or get wrong? It just happens again and again and again. So for instance, a perfect example of this is that the zombie ball thing. It's a really good video if you want to go see. Kingisa Rabada gets dismissed when he shouldn't have been dismissed in a game by Curtis Camphor running him out. Let's pretend that's India and it's, who do we want to give it to? Sri Lanka. And it's a World Cup. And it was just at the moment when Sri Lanka starts to hit with their tail and they're making a dent in the chase, which is more or less what South Africa were doing in that game, although they were a little bit further behind. But let's say that they were within chance of doing it and their tail is in and he's run out, right? And that Sri Lankan player has run out. We all know that would then be seen as another thing that has happened for Indian cricket. Oh, look at what's happened. Whereas the umpires didn't know the laws correctly. And not only that, it's not the only time that has happened. There was a blast game this year where there was a mistake with the umpires again. Umpires make mistakes. It's a really complicated system. And then on top of that, the playing conditions also complicate it more. Mohammad Nawaz thought he was out today when he wasn't out, right? These things happen over and over and over again. There was a no ball the other day where the foot landed and slid forward. And the third umpire has made that, and I think they've just made that decision too quickly. We've seen 2 runouts in this tournament that both went against India, where the ball has hit the stumps, but the thing that actually probably broke the stumps in both cases was the hands. Now, I don't even know if there is a way of looking at that from an MCC perspective, because that's really interesting. The ball has hit the stumps, but you can see it's the hands that break it. So we have to then guess that the ball would have broken the stumps. Right? This is a confusing sport. There are things to miss all the time. And so when I get comments like this, I just think to myself, are you guys not noticing all these other mistakes? Go through them. Have a look at some of some of your favorite games ever from Crick Info or Crick Buzz. Go through some of the old games. You'll see things where the commentator on the ball by ball is like, wait a minute, that was weird. I think I said earlier on in this series that there was a test match where the whole world was showing Josh Butler with his hands above in front of the stumps taking a ball. You got to be smarter than this, right? That's what this channel is about. There's plenty of other channels for just moaning about hating Pakistan and India and moaning that the world doesn't like Bangladesh enough, and moaning that South Africa is getting all those sorts of things. There's plenty of other channels you can find for that. This is about cricket. All right, these things happen all the time. As I said, there is an open corruption within the scheduling of this tournament. You don't need to look for Zapruder film things. You don't need to look for someone on the grassy knoll, right? Literally right in front of you, it is happening. The authenticity of every World Cup is corrupted by the way we schedule this tournament, right? The balls were before what happened to Australia. Teams were openly tampering with the balls, so much so that the umpires started holding them up and showing people. And still the ICC did nothing. They just allowed people to tamper with the ball for generations. Chucking. We had bowlers who were bowling 30 and 40 degrees with straightening in their arm for years. And then on a whim, the ICC decided to clear them all up. But they only looked at the spinners. There's still people probably chucking who are seam bowlers. Every bowler in the world should be tested regularly, right? There is obvious things going on here, right? Trying to work out if Erasmus's eyes were completely on Kohli. My eyes were on Kohli. Your eyes. Everyone, millions of people saw what Kohli did, and a handful of people realized that there was fake fielding there. Think about that. Right? Millions of people saw the umpire give a dead ball. I thought originally the umpire had dropped something, right? And yet a handful of people actually noticed that it was a dead ball and that the umpire made a mistake. Think about what you're saying when you make comments like this, right? It's ridiculous. All right. Well, there we go. If you want to continue to chat to me, probably the best place to come across is Spotify Live. And we can certainly chat more there. I will eventually finish this Pakistan video. In fact, I think I'm going to fix it today. Muku needs to give me one particular image on it, and I need to do the voiceover of it. But it's a really cool little video about Pakistan's tournament so far. I might use some of that Nawaz stuff, actually, now that I've already made it. The Sri Lanka on 99.94 got a podcast out about Dhananjaya De Silva. You'd have to ask yourself, whether I would whether I'd be pimping that particular episode if it wasn't Dhananjaya De Silva, and the answer would be no, because I love him so much. Obviously, it's Mitch Johnson podcast is out, and on Red Inca, where you just put up a really good podcast with me and Santoki, where we talk about the difference in captaincy. The difference in coaching in cricket. So we're looking at the fact that franchise coaching is very different to international coaching. But we're also looking at that coaching in cricket is still so weird because we had this inbuilt coach for so long. And so sports like football and basketball, the coach became such a big thing decades before it was in cricket, right? And how that fits in, and we're talking about Brian Lara, a little bit about Ravi Shastri, about Phil Simmons, and some of the other sort of professional coaches are coming up. I think it's a really fascinating chat. Anyway, again, I'm done with the World Cup mood board today. Thank you so much for coming on this one, and I will be back again tomorrow.